Dia Guiv Galera Cordia August Foil to wrote, welcome to be my guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation in Limerick, and Deel Animal Rescue in West Limerick. And I should also say that the Samaritans are Limerick and Tipperary, if I haven't already said that. But my lovely guest here today is Anne Cassidy-Carew, all the way from gloriously sunny San Francisco. Hi, Anne.
Hello, good morning, good evening.
Good evening. Although it looks like you're in West Clare in a farm.
That would be my mom, the birth of my mom's, the house that my mom was born in Sligo in the Ox Mountains.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a couple hundred years old. And as a child, I got to stay there during the summer for like 8 to 10 weeks. We got to stay in that house.
And you still live in it? I mean, do you still own it?
Yes, my aunt still owns it. Yeah, it's still on the farm that my mom grew up on and my grandparents owned. So yeah, it's a fond place for me. It's my, if you think about a place where you and I had spoken about mental health and wellness, this is a place where I like to go to because it's just this beautiful, lovely place.
Yeah. But Anne, you're involved with the United Irish Cultural Centre in San Francisco, and it's got a really long history. You might tell the listeners about the United Irish Cultural Centre.
I would be honored. So the Irish Cultural Center in San Francisco has been around since 1975. So last year we were supposed to celebrate 45 years on 45th Avenue. Unfortunately, that did not get to happen. And, the United Irish Cultural Center on 45th Avenue is really a long line of Irish cultural centers in San Francisco. So this is the 5th Irish Cultural Center in San Francisco since 1870. So there's some grand history in San Francisco with the Irish and their impact in San Francisco. And so we, this Irish Cultural Center that we're in now was basically built by volunteers 47 years ago, all volunteer work. So it was almost like when you think about like the Amish, the barn raising, it was very much similar to that, a total of 800 volunteers, men and women, the women bringing tea and lunch to the men back in the early 70s. And the men, whatever trade they did, they came out and helped. It's a pretty spectacular story.
That sounds so funny because I have a cousin who, she's my father's first cousin, and she's a strong woman. No, and she grew up during World War II in London. And her husband, they took the reverse roles. Her husband came home from work one day and he looked at her and she was down and she was digging the foundations for a conservatory that she built onto the house. And she dug the whole foundations out herself and built the whole foundation and got people in to put the windows in. And Liam was inside the kitchen doing all the cooking.
Yeah, I'm sure if there was women back then that did the trades, they would have jumped in a heartbeat. So
yeah, she learned so much from the war, London during the Blitz, because the walls were constantly being bombed. And she and her mother, her father was useless, but she and her mother would have to rebuild parts of their house regularly. So you learn, needs must, you learn when you have to.
It's funny that you should bring up about strong women. I just borrowed this book from the library. Oh, you may not be able to see it now. I might have to turn off my background. Oh, there it is.
You can see Constance Markovich. She was very heavily involved in the history of the cultural centre. She and De Valera, weren't they?
So, they came through. So I'd say it was like 1921 or 22, or it could be earlier than that. Constance Markovich did take a visit to San Francisco, and Eamon De Valera did the same thing. And, unfortunately this Irish Cultural Center wasn't around then, but they were involved in visiting. Probably my guess is there was 2 Irish Cultural Centers that kind of overlapped. So they probably did some visiting with that. But this book in particular we have an amazing library at the United Irish Cultural Center. And that too was created by a volunteer, a Patrick J. Dowling. He actually went around the world and collected books that were donated. And the whole library has been a collection of donations for the last 45, 46 years. And it's pretty spectacular. We have amazing books. I end up buying stuff all the time. I have lots of books that I keep buying. And there's plenty.
There's nothing like the new books or the old books either, even the way they were bound. My grandmother trained as a bookbinder.
Oh, wow.
She was a traditional Irish musician, singer and dancer, but she trained as a bookbinder. And I'm just fascinated with the way the older books were bound in comparison really to my book now was done by Cambridge scholars, and it was done really well. But I'm looking at here, we have hundreds of books here inside the studio. When you look at the old ones compared to the new ones, the detail that was put into them, they were intended to last for life.
Right. And just, when you think about the older books, the stories that they could tell, like they're telling the story that was written, but the hands that held them, they had their own stories too,
You hit on it, Anne. I mean, when you look at Kindle and everything, it's so handy, granted. But what people are losing out in is the history that's in a book beyond the story that's being told when you turn the pages and you read the story. There's far more history in the physicality of the book. The fact that how many hundreds, possibly thousands of people have their handprints all over that book and turn the page, that you can never replicate in a Kindle.
No, absolutely.
Or in a video story, somebody, I know they're beneficial for people who are sight impaired or aren't able to read for some reason or other, but there's nothing like the smell of a book, the fact that God only knows how many people handled that book in its life.
I'm a very kinesthetic learner, so just the fact of like flipping a page for me, I still prefer it. I had a Kindle and then I basically gave it to my kids to play a game on, and that was not how I wanted to read a book. Just a side note. So as I was mentioning, our library gets donations all the time. And one of the librarians volunteers was going through this one particular book that had been donated, and in an envelope as a bookmark, I'm assuming, or somebody just stuck an envelope in the book, was a letter that was signed by Jackie Onassis Kennedy. And she had written this letter, and it's her stationery and her signature. We haven't done anything to like send it to or ask about the Kennedy, there's a Kennedy museum.
Yeah.
But it's this phenomenal little like treasure that we have. And also with that was a brochure of when Kennedy was running for senator. I mean, it's like that's a treasure.
It's lovely when you have treasures like that. I have a book at home now, and it's the complete works of Thomas Moore, the complete works of poetry of Thomas Moore. A man gave it to me when I was an entertainer in Bunratty Castle, and it's falling apart. It was falling apart when I got it, so I'm going to have to get it. There's a man I know, and he's a beautiful bookbinder, Harry Gettelvog, and I'm going to get him to rebind it because the what would you call it, the edge of the book is after falling off. The back and the front is perfect, but it's just a beautiful book. And I mean, it's the first edition.
Oh, wow.
Works of Thomas Moore, and he gave me a loan of it, and he died the following day, and I could never find his family to return it. And then when I did, I was told, no, hold on to it, because he would have wanted me to have it.
Wow, that's crazy. That's totally crazy. So anyway, going back to the center, I kind of got distracted with the library, but
ask you, ye started off, you're a follow-up of the predecessors that set it up, which were the Knights of the Red Branch, trying to promote Irish culture in the city and the Bay. But what are the Knights of the Red Branch? Now, I could have researched it, but I thought, it's better coming from you, because I've never heard. I mean, we have the Knights of St. Columbanus and the Knights of Malta, but I've never heard of the Knights of the Red Branch.
So the way that I understand the Knights of the Red Branch was they were around, I guess, America, and they were a group of folks that were living here in America that supported, they sent money back to Ireland to support the transition, the transformation of government, the rebellion, so they were there to, there was a lot of money was collected by the diaspora, right? So they, when Eamon de Valera came around, I think he collected about 5 million American dollars. I mean, think about that in the 1920s.
Wow.
They're saying that that's equal to about $70 million today. And
easily.
And so that alone is that'll tell you really that strong Irish connection that is here in America across the country. I mean, it's
just astonishing. It's just absolutely astonishing, the Irish connection that's in America in general. I mean, 44 million at one stage claimed Irish descent. I mean, we're not even, as I think we said to you there, we're just around 4 million north and south in this country, but yet there's 6 or 10 times even more of us all around the place. And I sometimes think the Irish abroad become more Irish than the Irish themselves, the Irish who are living here, because we tend to take things for granted. Do you know?
But I think that's a normal behavior. I think that's a totally normal behavior. I was born and raised in San Francisco, right? And we have Alcatraz Island. You've heard the great story.
Famous Alcatraz.
Yeah. I never went to Alcatraz Island until I got married. All my cousins came from all over.
Was there a reason why you chose to go to Alcatraz when you got married?
I don't know. Call me crazy. No, all my cousins were going. Checking
out your potential home if
So I just think that I think what's in front of us, we take it for granted. I think what is, you kind of have to leave to go, oh my God, I miss the music, the dancing, the language, like you kind of, and I think that's what happened. Like, I think around the world, that's what happened with, especially here in America. They realized that just because they were 6,000 miles away or 3,000 miles away on the East Coast, like in New York or whatnot, they wanted still that connection to home. And so I think that's where it comes from. I mean, I am a very proud Irish woman. Both of my parents were born and raised in Ireland. I have a love for Ireland to the point where it's like, I would love to buy a house in Ireland. I would love to.
Good luck with that, because it's so expensive in this country.
Well, that's been the problem.
It's just astronomical, and I think things are only going to. I don't know where they're coming. I think they just make up the amounts as I mean, you could easily pay $1 million for a 3-bedroom semi-detached house right in Dublin, because it's in Dublin.
Right. I would want to be on the West Coast in Sligo. That's where I'd want to be.
I mean, our emphasis is on all the West Coast, the Wild Atlantic Way, and trying to promote the Wild Atlantic Way. But I do think the Irish are exceptional at selling Ireland, irrespective, and probably because of our weather. Sometimes the rain, we manage to sell rain better than anybody would sell sunshine in this country, because we're talkers. We can convince you that the rain is far better for you.
so true. It is so, so true. And really, I mean, I took 4 of my girlfriends. I had never been to Ireland 2 years ago. And I said, listen, you ain't going to Ireland for the sun. So pack some waterproof shoes, pack a jacket. If you want to bring an umbrella, it's kind of cumbersome. You don't really need an umbrella in Ireland because it's this soft, for the most part during the summer, it's of course there are the downfalls, don't get me wrong. And I've seen one, it was, I think 2014, we were driving to Westport, Mayo, and we had a little tiny car, and the rain was so hard. I thought we were going to be washed off the road. Yeah. I was like, this rain is going to take this car and wash this. It was insane rain. It was crazy. But anyway, I love the rain. It doesn't bother me. It's lovely. I mean, granted, I would imagine that if it rained continuously, I would be like, okay, enough's enough. But
you run in the organization, you run several scholarships funding. The Leo Walsh one is one of them, isn't it?
So yes,
it's a great idea.
Yeah, so we've been doing that. I think it's the 27th or 28th year. We typically fund anywhere from about 40 high school students that are graduating from high school or graduating from 8th grade. And it's about $40,000 every year. So, you times that, it's almost $500,000 in scholarships that we've been doing for the last, and we have a great team. So that's been managed by this amazing team of volunteers that take care of it every single year. They raise the money and then they distribute that scholarships, and it's a great way for the students that are applying to reconnect to their Irish heritage and take some time to reflect. So
yeah, but you have loads of these, I mean, this country, I mean, when you look at it, it's not as expensive to go to college here in Ireland, I will admit. It's not as, I mean, when I listen to how much it costs in the United States to send a child to college, I just wonder, how do people do it? I mean, 40,000 a year seems like astronomical. I mean, I think it's probably around 9,000. I'm not sure what it would be. Would it be about 10,000 a year for medicine and things like that? But then we don't have the wages in this country, so it works out. The cost of living is very high here. Do you know?
Right. Yeah. So I have a daughter who's graduating from high school who just is accepting her college acceptance to the University of California of Santa Barbara. And so I will actually have 2 children there. My son is already attending it. And so, yes, I will be feeling the double tuition, double expense next year.
80,000 a year. I hope they're going, and I get a sense that she's somewhere around the camera right now. But I should hope that she actually knows the sacrifices you have to make for their education, and that they work hard. I sometimes don't think students realize how much their parents sacrifice for them to get to college and that. But
it's funny because I think my kids do, and I'll tell you why. My parents sacrificed a lot for me to go to college, right? Because my parents didn't even finish high school. When you think about it, like they left school at 15 or they left school at 16, and like they didn't go off to college. They went off and worked, or they left, they immigrated. So when it came time for me, I was first generation American to go off to college, and I pursued a bachelor's degree. I hadn't a clue as to what to do. And turning to my parents, they hadn't a clue. All they knew is that you're going off to college. They knew that, right? That was the one thing they knew. So education was always instilled upon me, the importance of it. And I, in turn, instilled that same expectation, that same, education is important. I also at 40 went back and got my master's degree. So my kids saw that education, I continued education. So they saw that their mom, yes, she had gotten a bachelor's degree when she was younger, but she went back at 40 and continued to learn and grow.
I understand that, and I think one thing I'm hugely strong on and hugely passionate about is lifelong learning, what
Yeah.
we call lifelong learning. I mean, I went back, I spent my whole life as a dancer, an Irish dancer, and so education, even though I was good at school, I just, I was always focused on entertainment and the stage and performing, and so I went back and as an adult, and I did my degree, my master's, my PhD, and as a mature student. And I think it's so important. I'm so saddened when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm too old to do that now." Or sure, that's gone now. I'd have loved to have done that when I'd have loved to have been an accountant, or I'd have loved to have been a teacher, or I'd have loved to. You're never going to be as young as you are right now, ever again.
Absolutely.
And you can do it. And it's one thing I hugely admire about America, is the fact that for the most part, it's not ageist. It celebrates people. It celebrates rags to riches, and it celebrates people going back at whatever age and becoming. And I'm just greatly saddened by societies that are so ingrained in ageism, and basically put people out to pasture when they reach a certain age, irrespective of Pat, now here in the station with me, his dad's 91. He's the fittest man I've ever seen in my life. He's been retired for nearly 40 years. And he's been drawing a pension for nearly 40 years when he could have been earning a salary and saving the government. I just find people, governments and that, very narrow-minded. If they left people in jobs, they'd be earning a living instead of drawing from the government because they've reached a certain 65, and you live till you're 95, and he's as fit as a fiddle.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have too much ageism. Well, I'm saying this from a general place. I would agree that we don't have much ageism, but we certainly don't. I don't think we do a good job with taking care of our seniors. My dad has been ill on and off for the last several years, and some of the facilities are, you wouldn't want to put a dog or a cat in them. It's horrendous, and it's disgraceful for a country that is as rich as it is to allow seniors, to be in a setting like that, perhaps their last days, weeks, or months of their life. That's where I have a problem, is that we don't do good and don't do right for some of our seniors in some of the places that they end up in. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, but where do you see the United Irish Cultural Centre going? What direction do you envisage it? Because you seem to me to be a very the type of person, an ideas person.
So I was president for 2 years. I was president in 2019 and 2020, probably some of the hardest 2 years of my life, just carrying a 20,000 square foot building on my back. I had a great board that was with me, and we had to, I was just telling somebody the other day, I said, we really had to tighten our belts in order to get through the pandemic. I mean, we cut back. There was no fat left on the pig, if you will. Like, we just cut back every place that we can to get through and survive and come out on the other side. I handed the stick over to Liam Reedy, who is now the president of the board. And
another great Irish name, Liam Reedy.
Yeah.
Another great Irish name, Liam Reedy.
Yeah, no, he's a brilliant guy. And the Irish Cultural Center is at a crossroad. It needs a lot of work. It's 2 blocks away from the ocean here in San Francisco. And when you're 2 blocks away from the water, your building takes a toll, right? There's the salt water just eats away at the paint and eats away at anything on the roof. And I mean, so we're at a crossroads, and there's a big meeting on May 7th to discuss with members and with the Irish community in general, to say that we're looking to take features of the old Irish Cultural Center, the exterior and parts of the building, and turn it into a brand new building, because there is so much work that needs to be done within the building that it almost doesn't make sense to kind of do patchwork now. And instead, there's this movement to take it to the next, and think about it for the next 50 years. So,
are you going to build it from scratch, or are you going to use it as a conservation project? In other words, holding on to some parts so that you can read the history, rather than trying to make it look like it's old when it's not. It's new looking old. Sometimes I'm very pro conservation, I suppose, because my degree is in art and design, so I'd be very much into being able to read the history of the building and say, oh, that was the original structure, and we built this on now, and this is completely new, but it's completely a different style, but in keeping with the old. I think sometimes people knock buildings because they're old, and then they say afterwards, why did they ever knock it? Because the original building would have lasted another 100, 200 years, whereas the new building has fallen down after 10 and had to be rebuilt. And I've seen too many of that. So I would just caution, but
absolutely. So part of it is there's concern about structural. So, here in San Francisco, we get earthquakes, right? And so this building was made in 1975, and there's been different, through the centuries, right? And through the decades, you get different buildings codes and whatnot. And so there's some concern about, how it was built then versus now, and then structurally. So there is the conversation, we're leading the conversation. I'm not, the new board is leading the conversation to create a new building, a new structure, but take again some of the interior and exterior parts of the building and incorporate it into the new. So they don't want to lose complete, there's important parts of the building that they don't want to lose. So that's an important part of the conversation. And so, it's going to be a big meeting. It's a big discussion. It's a big project, but there's a team of folks that built, we have a treasure island. It's in between, it's in the middle of the bay. And they built this huge, amazing, lovely GAA fields, and this particular group of folks did it then, and I think they can do it again now. And so I feel confident, because there is a lot of things that the building it's wrong. Like there's, the HVAC system that cost $500,000 just to take it off the building and then put a brand new one on. I mean, I could go on and on. The plumbing is, so there's a lot of things that need to be upgraded. And you start to talk to people, and they're like, the minute you start to do one, you'll have to do it all.
Yeah. So sometimes you're as well off to start from scratch, and maintain, even if when you're knocking the building or whatever, if you held on to some of the brickwork, or held on to some of the foundational blocks or whatever, that they're still going into the new building, and that you're carrying the history of it. Or if there was wallpaper in the rooms, try and remove the wallpaper so that you can incorporate it into certain areas of the building, so you can still look and say that was, or frame it within a building, that you're bringing the past along with you, because we are very much, as human beings, we are very much connected to our past. People say, oh, the past is the past, but if you don't bring the past along with you, you have no present or future. because, you know, we learn from the past. We also learn the mistakes of the past, we hope, but we
Right.
also learn the positive things that came from our past. And books, again, are that. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I get very upset when I hear about this cancel culture and people trying to cancel books because they don't fit into society today, when in actual fact they were of their time. And
Right.
you as a teacher know the importance of taking that book, like we were looking there earlier on, To Kill a Mockingbird, discussing it in school in its context of the era that it came from. And it's important that you don't throw away the past, that you bring it with you, even if in the building, in the sense of the building.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the big things is honoring those 800 volunteers in the 1970s, and honoring the story that came with it, right? They were all coming together before the Irish Center was built and having many conversations about how it was going to look like, what it was, you know, all of that, right? And so as part of this, you know, going forward and looking to the future, we are looking to the past and saying, we're honoring your legacy. We're honoring what you did for us today, because that's the other thing, right? The story doesn't end. It's just a new chapter. And that's the important part, is that we're just another chapter of the Irish history and the Irish in San Francisco.
You could have a Constance Markovich room.
Exactly. I would love to, because she is, I was just telling somebody, so Mary, how do we get this to happen? There needs to be a movie about Constance Markovich. She is an amazing story. I mean, when you think about it.
Absolutely amazing story. And most of the Irish women who fought alongside the men, the Mná na hÉireann, as we say here in Ireland, the women of Ireland, Mná being women and na hÉireann, women of Ireland. They fought just as much as their men fought. Many of them did it in secret, or did it in by hiding guns. Many of them took more active roles. Many of them, like Markovich, were imprisoned for the crime of loving their country and
Yep.
wanting its freedom. And you know, I mean, we don't pay enough, I don't think, due homage to the women that gave. I mean, for a long time, you know, I mean, women really weren't. They were seen as being a support to the men.
Right.
They weren't seen as being heroines in their own right.
Right, and equal too. But you know what's interesting about it, though? The proclamation that, you know, Padraig Pearson, that group, created, you know, the proclamation, it does mention Irish men and Irish women. And you don't see that in the American Declaration, right? You don't see that. And so that in itself is a beautiful acknowledgement.
Yeah, Pat is very much into Irish history now, and very much into the rising and the proclamation and the foundation of the state and everything like that. He went to an all Irish speaking boarding school.
Oh, wow.
To be a priest, and he ended up not being a priest. But you know, the Irish still didn't do him any harm, you know. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It does say Irish men and Irish women, but sadly, we also say in our constitution that all children should be treated equally and treated with the same respect. But sadly, they're not, because, you know, I have a big problem when it comes to the Irish language. I think the Irish language should be compulsory in every school in Ireland, and then children, because when they do their leaving cert here in this country, which is the exam that gets you into college, they have to pass the Irish language, in order to get in. Now, if you're a child who was brought up with family who are not, English is not their first language, or the parents didn't go to school, and didn't get much of an education, may not be able to read or write. They may have dyslexia, or they may have never been able to read or write. And those children are disadvantaged. And the only way I feel that they're all going to be on an equal par, especially when it comes to the Irish language, because you can get nowhere in this country in exams unless you do 9 subjects, and if you fail Irish, you fail the whole exam.
That's crazy.
And it's insane. I mean, you'd have to go back, and you can't get into college. You can as a mature student, but not as a school leaver. So I think it should be compulsory in all schools. That way each child is on an equal level, that they're all being taught it from the beginning, and that there should be tutors there for children after school, so that every child benefits from having somebody to help them with their homework and things like that. Don't think that, but I don't think it's an Irish thing either. I just don't think that all children are equal in society.
Well, that's across the board. I mean, as a counselor, I come up against that on a daily basis, where, I have a kid that comes to school and he hasn't eaten, and, my job then is to make sure that he has a meal. Children, even for us, depending on the school district that you live in, determines the school that you'll go to and the funding. So each county has its own, like my school district is one of the lowest paid school districts in San Mateo County out of 24 school districts. So there's a variance, like on the average, per student, you keep hearing about per student and how much, I think we're at 14,000 per student, but there are districts that get $22,000 for their student because it's based on property taxes. And so, no, there is no equality, and people talk about it as part of this conversation. And until each child at each school gets the same, costs or the same amount of money for them to attend school, we will never have equality ever.
And I have to be honest, what appalls me is when you hear stories about children having food taken from their plates because their parents haven't paid their expenses. Not here in Ireland, it wouldn't happen, but I've heard several cases where it's happened in the States, say for instance, in certain states, where children and they were given a sandwich, but the hot meal was taken because the parent didn't. I mean, there was outrage in a few places. Now, as bad as people used to talk about the nuns, I went to all nuns, but they always made sure that children who were from poor families or had loads of sisters and brothers all got what they called milk and buns during the day. So they got these rolls, and they got milk every day so that they weren't hungry. And I just think, if a parent can't pay, the child shouldn't suffer. There should be something.
Absolutely.
Most schools in America have that, but I was reading several cases where mothers were putting up posts about children's food being just thrown into the bin because their parent hadn't paid, when they went up to the till, and the cashier was saying, well, I'm told I've got to do that. But Jesus,
right. There's no logic in some of these decisions that are done and made. Fortunately, I haven't seen that in my area, but across the country, you never know what kind of crazy, illogical ways they might do elsewhere. So I'm fortunate that in California, I haven't heard about any craziness like that. I'm kind of, I guess you'd say, a little bit of a rebel when it comes to supporting.
I don't think you tolerate that now.
I really don't. I actually got into an argument with, now I'm just a counselor, right? I'm not, in leadership at all, but I got into an argument with, he was the director of the food services in my district. And there's a law. So by law, if there's a student is a foster student, so somebody, a child that's a foster child, they don't need to fill out a application for free and reduced lunch. It's automatic. So if they're in the foster system, it's automatic, which is the way it should be. They shouldn't have to jump through any more hoops. The poor, these children that deal with enough. So he basically wrote back to me, he goes, no, we were audited and everybody still needs to fill out an application. So then what I started to do is basically put my name on the application, the student's name, and basically put my phone number and said, if you have any questions, call me. Like, we're not going to mess around. Here's your application. We're done. Like, we're talking about feeding a child. Okay.
The very basic, it is feeding a child. I mean, I can remember I was an only child. So, and Dad was in England, Mum was in Ireland, she had half his wages. We hadn't loads, but I thought we were very rich because I was an only child. And but when the ice cream man used to come around, I don't know what they call them in the States, but the ice cream man used to come around and all my friends used to come with me. And he knew my mum, he grew up with her. So he used to give us the ice creams because he'd know that she was going to end up paying for them. But most of the time she'd come out and she'd look and there'd be about 6 or 7 with me. So she'd have to buy an ice cream for all 6 of them because she wouldn't let them go gone. But then he started to realize that I was taking advantage of that and bringing all my friends, Mom will pay.
It's funny that you could say, as a child, you think you're rich and whatnot. On an opposite, this house that I was talking about, my grandmother and my mom's house that she was born in, I mentioned earlier that we used to go back and be on my uncle's farm, my grandparents' farm, for anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 weeks during the summer. And super, super lucky. We got to be with my uncle and we were like, went to the bog and did the turf and went to the hay field and like did all of the things that a farmer would do. So I remember telling the story later in life, how I used to go and spend 8 to 10 weeks or 12 weeks at this farm. And people actually said, are you guys rich? And I was like, okay, wait a minute. Let me explain to you. This house, cement floor, the big hearth, no running water. The running water was actually outside, yeah. And you had to go down to the well or down to the new house to get actual water. It didn't have a restroom. We had to go to the new house to go to the restroom.
Yeah.
We're talking, it made me laugh because even getting out of bed, there was no rug on the floor. It was like, you put your feet on that cement floor, you were awake.
Wide awake. But those houses like that, when they were building the folk park in Bunratty Castle, they took all of the houses that are in there, they took brick by brick from the area that they were in West Limerick, or the west of Ireland, I should say, and they brought them and they rebuilt them brick by brick exactly as they were, but they just moved them from, so that they're all, if you go in around the folk park where I was for 14 years, you have the Shannon farmhouse, you've got all the farmhouses, the kitchens, the pub, the doctor's house, the church, the schoolyard. It's a real little village, but it's an amalgamation of houses that came from the west of Ireland. Houses like your grandmother's behind you, and that were just taken down brick by brick, extensive photographs taken of them and rebuilt exactly as they were, but just in a place where they could be protected and put on show, if you like. But when you go into them, they're just all this flagstone flooring, and which in itself is beautiful because you can see all the little creatures that lived inside in the flagstone over and died embedded in them for centuries. But it's beautiful slate flooring and thatched roofs, which is an art form that's dying out, but thankfully there are still a few good thatchers around. But you know, you'd see lots of little houses in the Bunratty Folk Park the next time you're over, like your grandmother's house behind you or your aunt's house. And they're beautiful to see.
They really are. And so I started to go to Ireland in 1973. And I don't remember if there was thatch still then, because my grandfather passed away in 79.
There's still thatch houses today here in Ireland.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
thatch, but they're very expensive insurance-wise.
Oh, I'm sure. That's the other thing, right? So like they talk about these art forms. Even I believe that the bogland and turf, it's an art form, right? I mean, you go and there's work to it. And I drove my friends, remember I was telling you that I took friends to Ireland, and we drove and found where the bogland was that my mom, you know, they used to get the turf from. And we parked the car, and there was two fellas working in their area. And they just kept watching us like, you know, what are you doing kind of thing, like very apprehensive, because it's
an Irish suspicion. You could be the taxman.
But it was just, I wanted them to see like how people heated their houses for so many years, and what the bogland looked like, and what
there's nothing like the turf fires, because when you go into Bunratty as well, you go down and you have the Golden the Golden Vale farmhouse kitchen, and you have the area where we used to put on our entertainment, and you go in and there's a turf fire on. You're supposed to stack the turf upwards, otherwise the smoke will be everywhere. I mean, you come out of the place like somebody who was coughing up a lung, but with emphysema. But it was, you know, the smell. You'll be smelling of turf when you come out, but you don't. There's nothing like a turf fire.
Well, no, I agree 100%. My aunt still has the stove that, you know, you lift the thing up.
Yeah, they're big now again in Ireland. They're huge. The stoves. They're getting all built into their big marble 21st century fireplaces, and the stoves built in. It's a huge thing now to have a stove. And I mean, people threw out stoves years ago because they were fashioned. They're back in so big in this country now.
I'm so glad to hear that, because it's one of my favorite things of walking into a house, and even my aunt's house, and taking the thing off and then putting the turf
lid up and throwing my grandaunt had one of those. You lifted the lid off, and then you threw it down into. Nowadays the stoves, they open from the front, they open out, and you can put turf, or you can put wood, or you can put peat briquettes, or you can put coal into them. They're multi-functional. And then you close the door, and it heats the whole house. And it's like, it's just fabulous. I mean, my cousin now has one in her house, and her fireplace is magnificent. They had a bicycle shop for years, and they found this fireplace upstairs in it, and it was covered in layers and layers, hundreds of years of layers of paint that somebody had painted over it. And they brought it right across the road to a guy who dipped it into some solution. And a couple of weeks later, when it was all cleaned up, if you saw it, it's just a work of art of a fireplace. Wow. People over the centuries just started painting it white or painting it black because they were sick of looking at the tiles.
Yeah.
It's exquisite. And then they put the stove into it.
Yeah.
And it's just bringing the old and the new. It's just I think lovely. So where to now with the United Irish Cultural Centre?
So we, as I said, on May 7th, we'll have this large meeting, hopefully, where there's a big discussion, and people in the community get to put in their input and their opinions. And, you know, hopefully it's a long-term project. I mean, we're talking it'll take, probably 18 months to go through the city approval, and then it'll take a couple more years to have it built. So, we're talking, it's a project it's a long-term project. But in the meantime, our goal is to really make sure that we're sharing Irish culture, right? And talking about our Irish library and the Irish language and music, but also working with, we also want to work with other cultures, like, so that we're, the idea of an immigrant story, right? It doesn't just stop with the Irish. It's bigger, it's greater, it's grander.
And Michael Dillon did a dance choreography, a dance figure for the World Championships, and he took a very different angle, because usually with the World Irish Dancing Championships, they take the immigrant, the Irish moving abroad, and how they were accepted in London or were rejected in London or America, all over America. But Michael did it the other way. He said, how were other people taken by Ireland? So he looked at the Jewish community here in Limerick in the early 1900s, and how they were pushed out of Limerick. It was called a pogrom, but it really wasn't a pogrom, because nobody was killed. It was just people who were harassed until they actually felt they wanted to move to America, ended up on Cork to get the boat, and decided to stay in Cork City. And in Cork, many of them never left Cork. But Michael did his dance choreography on how the Jews were treated when they came to Ireland, which was a lovely and fabulous dance drama choreographed by Richard Griffin. But the whole idea was Michael's, and the dancers were his, and a fabulous job. But I do think we need to look outwards from how we, as a country, left our shores to go to other countries, and we made it in other countries, and we became part of the fabric. In fact, we became fundamental to the fabric of so many countries. But we also need to look at how we embraced, and we continue to embrace or reject people who are trying to come to this country,
right,
for a new home. And I don't think we do that enough. I think we permanently think of ourselves as immigrants to other countries, whereas in actual fact we're also hosts to people who are fleeing their countries or leaving their countries for economic reasons. And that's an interesting area that I don't think is looked at enough.
Which is why we had mass immigration, right? Because there was nothing in Ireland, and there was, people were dying from the famine. And so for us to then look now today and make comments about others coming from their, savaged or ravaged countries, we need to humble ourselves and say that
memories.
Yeah. And so, we just want to expand our cultural programming and again, honor especially the San Francisco Irish history. And as you said, the legacy and how we have become a part of the fabric. I mean, the Irish in San Francisco, I think, and don't hold me to the exact number, but I'm guessing about 17 of the mayors in San Francisco have Irish descent. And that's a significant amount
we're like the mafia. The Irish are, give us a little bit of room to get in, and we'll take over.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I think I mentioned to you and Pat the other day about how in San Francisco in the early 1900s, the Irish language was being taught in all of the Catholic grammar schools in San Francisco. I mean, that's a huge influence when you think about it, right? I mean, to have the Irish language be brought into the curriculum of the Catholic schools in San Francisco, that's massive.
But we're never going to retain and I say this, I was born in the UK, my father was English, of a Welsh mother, and but my mother was very Irish and fluent Irish. And we're never going to retain the Irish language unless we actually start it at children's level at 5, 4, 5, 6, that way, and we start teaching it not as a subject but as a hobby, as something that people teach it through comedy, teach it through drama, teach it through cartoons, teach it at a level that children understand, crossword puzzles, games. Make it fun for children to learn it, and let them be grammatically incorrect. I mean, I went through the system in primary school from babies, the very first class when I was 5, all the way up primary and secondary with Irish. And I came out in secondary, and I wouldn't be able to speak Irish fluently because we were taught what we call the Mocanila, the Aimshakata, the Aimshalora, the past, present, and future tenses. And if you didn't get them right, you got this big red line written across it. It shouldn't have been about that. It should have been about getting children speaking, make mistakes, correct somebody's grammar, but leave them talk away. And that's the way. And it's the same with the Irish language in San Francisco. Learn it through conversation, through games, through.
Yeah, we're working on, so we work with Kiltis. So there's a branch of Kiltis here, and it's, oh God, I'm going to draw a blank now. Keely Coogan. It'll come to me. But so this branch that's been around here in San Francisco for about 45 years. And that's the other thing I'll just mention really quickly. The Irish Center has worked with many Irish organizations for many years. So some of the Irish organizations that the Irish Center still continues, and I think I did mention this the other day, is the United Irish Societies. So the United Irish Societies is this 100-year-old organization that's been doing our St. Patrick's Day parades. So the St. Patrick's Day parade was basically on its 169th or 70th year. It didn't happen last year. It didn't happen this year, but that's some major history right there. We've also been working with the Rebel Corks Benevolent Association. That's another 100-year-old organization. Ancient Order of Hibernians. That's another 100-year-old organization. So we have these great collaborations and connections with some of the older Irish organizations that also have history. And we're trying to also work with them to gather their information so it's not lost. So that's the other part of the story, right, Mary, is making sure those stories that have been around for 100 years don't die away, and holding on to that.
I think that's the basis of, I suppose, our station as well, is certainly mine from the point of view of hearing people's stories and documenting people's stories for posterity, whether those stories are of genocide or of survival of genocides of all types, or whether they're the stories of cultural significance. They're all important, because it's one thing reading about. And as much as I love books and that, not everybody has the attention span to read books and to learn about, or they mightn't have the mental ability to three-dimensionalize somebody within a book. But when you see a survivor having a conversation, or you see them talking about their life here in Ireland or their new life in America and having to leave Ireland, and the heartbreak of leaving, and being able to adjust, and the reasons they were able to adjust, and what it was that helped them to adjust to their new country in as gentle a way as possible. I just think that's what we're trying to do with the shows. Our station is aimed at the Irish and the international audience, but particularly the diaspora. And we're trying to, I suppose, promote the Wild Atlantic Way in the process, because we have the Wild Atlantic Way would probably be the most rugged, parts of Ireland, the most untouched and unspoiled. And I suppose I feel that in a world where everything is becoming so fast and so furious and so modern and so contemporary and everyone is so cool, it's always nice at times to be able to look back and look and see it in the context of an environment that hasn't changed for thousands of years. So that's why we use videos in the background that are all of the Wild Atlantic Way or Old Ireland.
I think that's important in general, Mary, is to make sure that, I've been trying to work with mindfulness and mental health and the idea. I think that's where going back and just pausing and reflecting upon, the idea of it, in Sligo, there's multiple rock formations like Carramore and Cara. There's another one. And so to go there and just spend time in a place that, was inhabited, or these people, somebody, some many years ago, did these rock formations in a very specific way with a purpose. There is an element to, I think we all need that. I think we all need to kind of.
Absolutely do. We tend to think that we're living in a world of supremely talented and forward-thinking people, when in actual fact you've only got to look back to the pyramids and in Egypt to know that there were people who did it far better and they lasted far longer, and they with less equipment and everything than they had. And Pat is just in here now. So, but the less equipment than we had at the time. And so basically, we have to be mindful of the fact, when you look at Allowee Caves in the Burren and you look at the Burren itself, the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of millions and millions and millions of footprints all over that.
Absolutely.
Like going back to the book again, turning the pages and everyone's handprints all over it.
Absolutely, because instead of it being a handprint, it's a footprint, and you see that also at Newgrange. You see that, you see it in these places that have captured, and they're in Ireland. That's the other part. Like, I not only want to acknowledge, the music and the dance and because culture is such a vague word, right? It means a lot. It means literature, it means art, it means the ways of what was. And talking about Ireland is also something, and promoting Ireland is also something that we will do and continue to do, because that's a part of the story as well, right? We're not just talking about the dance, the music, the literature, the sports. We're talking about what Ireland was, where it is now, and promoting Ireland today. So it's as much a part of the conversation as everything else is. And so I really, as the cultural program director now, I want to be making these connections with you and with others around Ireland, and actually having more conversations. One of my things is I want to reach out to, there's a beautiful art studio in Lahinch that we went to a couple of years ago. And I'm imagining they're not open because, Ireland is closed for so many months now. But it's this lovely, lovely art studio that has all these different artists. I want to reach out to them and have a conversation with them and say, just because we're 6,000 miles away doesn't mean we can't be connected and we can't promote that.
Across the miles. Well, Anne, it was an absolute joy talking to you today, and hopefully we can work together on this, and that there can be that we can collaborate on it. And Shindera Leshan Clora, that's the end of the show for today. Until the next time, Lacuna Day. Bawallam to Galer Chiacona, Sonas August Grow, August Gade Shiv Sloan. Sloan Anne.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.